Hey, what's up, guys? This is tutorial 2 for my Patreon, and we're going to be covering terrain generation using Houdini. You could do similar things in World Machine, and I might cover a little bit of World Machine some other class, but for now we're going to use Houdini just because recently in Houdini 16 we got the awesome terrain tools, and they really kind of let you do just about anything you want. So there's no need to really use a third-party app anymore. If you're a Houdini user, you could just use Houdini's terrain tools. And basically, they let you do a lot of really cool things. You can mix up polygon assets that you've built and blend them into the height field. You could bring in height maps that you've generated elsewhere. You can bring in DEM data from satellite imagery, and I'll probably cover satellite-based workflows in another tutorial that's a little more advanced. But for this, we're just going to cover the basics, kind of get down what the nodes do and how to make your own custom terrain to do what you want. And so, right out of the bat, if you want to explore, I recommend you check the terrain tab. There's some pre-made stuff here that you can kind of click on and check out the nodes and see how they work. But for our purposes, we're going to start completely from scratch. So we're in the OBJ object context, and we're going to hit tab. And if you type in HF, you get all the height field related nodes. So right now there's only the height field because we're an object node. But once we dive in, so let's drop this in and let's hit enter. If we hit tab and hit HF again, we get all these nodes that are height field related. Now I'm not going to cover all of them. I mean, just check them out in the documentation and play around with them. But I'm going to cover the more important ones that let you do a lot of cool stuff. So as you can see, it's to scale. So the way the height field node works is this is your base. You need to start with the height field. And what it's doing is it's taking a 2D volume and then basically displacing it. And so the size, 1,000 by 1,000 is the stock. This is assuming 1,000 meters. So each increment unit is a meter. So for our purposes, let's go with 3,000. You can make whatever shape you want, as long as it's a box, basically a grid of some kind. So 3,000 by 1,000 or 3,000 by 3,000. Let's do 5,000 by 5,000. And so this is a pretty big 5,000 meters square, which is pretty large. And the grid spacing and uniform scale, this obviously, as you can see, scales it. I don't really ever touch the uniform scaling. I just stick to the actual units. And the grid spacing, you can think of this as like resolution. If you were to think of it like voxels in a way, like 2D voxels, this is the resolution. So 2 is a pretty good starting resolution. 1 is pretty high quality. Once you start going beneath 1, like 0.5, 0.1, it bogs down Houdini. And you might need to do that, you know, if you're going to go for like a final quality and you're going to cook like your whole high quality res height field data. But you know, usually 2 is a good starting point. 2, something between 2 and 1. I think 2 is fine for our purposes. And so from here, you basically have to start building a layer setup of nodes to start, you know, getting some cool stuff going. And so one of the main nodes you're going to be using a lot is HF and noise. So height field noise. So let's drop this down. Let's wire it up. And most of these height field nodes actually have 2 inputs. So let's zoom in here. And this input on the right is typically for the mask. So if you're going to the node is only going to influence masked out areas, and this input is for the height field data, basically following down the chain. So if we turn this on, if we flag it on, we zoom in here, we get already right out of the gate, we've got this cool kind of displaced terrain, and it looks, it's pretty awesome how you can view it in the viewport with pretty good quality. And so if you were to, move your camera down and be something like this, you could already see where this has already got potential. And all we did was drop down one noise. And so the noise node has a whole bunch of features. You can add, you could subtract, different types of operations. So let's say you had another noise node or something, and you wanted to just subtract from the previous, you could switch to subtract. The amplitude, this is like any other noise node in any other program, amplitude increases the strength, amplitude, element size. So if we wanted something more of like rolling hills, we'll move it this way, and the wavelength is larger. And obviously the opposite effect if you move to the other side. And actually, let's increase the grid spacing. Let's try 3, just for viewport speed. Let's even go to 4. And that'll just make it lower res. You could always upsample this in the future, since this is all procedural. And let's bring back the amplitude. Something more hill, rolling hill kind of looking. And your fractal types, you have basically the standard, terrain, hybrid terrain. Personally, I like hybrid terrain. There's the noise type. So sparse is like what it comes with. There's Perlin that everybody knows. There's periodic Perlin, simplex, flow, periodic flow. So you get these rolling kind of hills. Whirly, which is great for like sand dunes and stuff like that, or more space looking kind of scenes. Whirly cellular, and then good old alligator. And so we're gonna just stick to probably, I don't know, not periodic. Simplex is pretty good for mountains, stuff like that, or just sparse convoluted. For our purposes, I think we'll just start with a little hill. And what's cool is, let's say I drop another noise down. So let's do another noise. And so we just saw what let's flag this on. It's going to double up on it, but let's say we subtract this time. So now we're actually cutting into it using this noise, like I said earlier. So let's say we change to whirly. So now we're getting the opposite of whirly, but we could do something like this, or we could do additive, do the difference. Multiply is way too strong. You can blend, and then blend between them. So let's this is our base. Let's blend between them, something like this. So that way we get a little definition, but at the same time the terrain's in general looking like little hills and stuff. And what's really cool is that you're able to build custom stuff into this. And by that I mean, like, okay, let's say you wanted like a big mountain right here and some 2 side mountains or something, right? So what you can do is you can bring in geometry. So let's do I don't know, let's see, we got a box, tube. Let's do a tube. Tube tends to be pretty good for mountains. And so let's template this. And where's our tube? Must be really tiny. Okay, yeah, it's way way down there. So let's increase the scale on this. Let's go with 100. And right now, on its axis, let's bring this up. It doesn't actually matter if it's exactly on 0, and the reason is because it's projecting onto the height field, and I'll explain what that means in a little bit once we actually combine them. And so let's actually make this, let's put some end caps onto this, and let's make the top radius 0, so it's a point, and let's do something like this, so that way the base of the mountain is shaped something like this. And obviously on your own you could sculpt your own geometry as a base, and tweak this further, but we're gonna keep something simple. So let's see, that's still way too small, so let's actually now just let's do a transform, so that way we can move this around and actually scale it further, so something like this. And let's actually merge it now into our height field. So there's a special node. If you type in HF, it's called HF project, and there it is, height field project. And so what you do is these green slots are for height field data. So let's plug that in, and you're going to get an error because right now there's no geometry SOP data. So if we wire this in, and boom, now we have our geometry. And as you can see, it's being projected down, so that's why we're getting this weird kind of cutting on the edges. And so if you can move this around now. Let's I don't know, let's move it around. You could rotate it. I mean, pretty much it's like real geometry, so you could do whatever you want with it. Let's actually move it by 100. Let's move it somewhere over here, and let's move it this way. And so what I meant by earlier, that if you move up and down, since it's a projection, it actually doesn't matter. As you can see, it's lifting the ground. It doesn't matter how high up and down you move it. Basically, if you move it, it's just going to do that, because it's projecting it down to the base. And so yeah, let's just leave it at 0. And so what you can do now to fix this weird artifacting that we got going on the edges is you could use a blur. So HF blur, and what happens is we end up blurring that input, as you can see. Now in this situation, I think it'd actually be better if we cut this and we moved. Usually you want to do the noises afterwards, so that way it affects your inputted geometry. So we're going to wire this back up into here a little further ahead and plug that back in, so that way we have the geometry coming in just on a flat surface. And as you can see, here's the blur, so it blurred out the edge, and that way the blur doesn't affect everything. So if we increase the blur, we get a smooth transition, and that's pretty good. So the cool thing is we can do this. We can further add details. So let's say you had a skull or some actual shape that you want to art direct, you could do it this way. You know, you bring in geometry just like any other. You would just be file and you would load up the geometry. But we're going to just use tube shapes just to make mountains and stuff. And so let's do a merge. So let's drop it in right here. And right now we have only one set of geometry, one tube. So let's duplicate this 3 times and let's merge it in. And so now that we've got this here, let's move this around. So let's see. Let's move this forward. And let's scale it down a little bit. Let's do the same thing here, but let's move it this way. Let's scale it down a tad. And so as you can see, you could really start to, let's cut that, get some complex shapes going. So let's duplicate this again. Wire it up. And let's move this down this way. So okay, cool. So just imagine, you know, you could art direct your hills all you want, you know. You could get crazy with this. Let's make this 200. And let's make our original one 202. So we've got this larger hill. And let's actually increase the height just a tad, so 150. And as you can see, it's beneath the surface. So let's and yeah, and you don't have to use just typing in stuff, but I like to do it this way. But you could also use the navigation tools and stuff, so to visually do it. And something like that. That should be cool. Let's try. Let's bring this one just a tad down. And it's like, okay, cool. So we got this little layout now. And again, you could bring in any geometry SOPs or file, whatever, merge it all together, and then you project it onto your surface using the height field project node. We then have the blur, just so that way we get a smooth transition and blending. And then we have the height field noise, and so that's why we had it earlier, so that the noise gets added to our little mountain things. Then let's add a secondary noise. And as you can see, it's already starting to make some cool organic, you know, kind of looking shapes. And so now if you really want to get things going and interesting, there's the where is it at? Layer property, layer clear, mask blur, mask by feature. And so this is one of the most important nodes, in my opinion. And the way this node works is, as you can tell, it says mask by feature. And so if you turn it on, this red that you see is a mask that's being generated by whatever settings you have. So you can mask it by height. So right now it's masking by slope. So the slope angle of 20 for minimum. So if I drop this down, you get more of this. If you increase it, decrease it. Let's have this masking go on. Let's do it on the cliff edges. So let's actually increase this to something like this. And you could actually turn this on to do different types of masking. So you could have the by height, and so obviously 0 to 1, it's not going to do anything. It's going to get rid of it because 1 is tiny. So as you can see, if we were to do 200, you could limit where this is going to occur. And so let's do 200. Yeah, 200 is cool. And you could control this by ramps also. So if you want, you get real creative and really mess around and, you know, have some fall off and stuff like that. So let's get some fall off going. And then you could tweak the fall off type and all that. And so we got a nice little blend now going on. And you could also tweak it by peaks and valleys, direction. So you get real crazy. And then you got this, the smoothing radius, which lets you kind of get rid of the detail. It basically blurs out the smaller details and stuff. And let's actually tweak the fall off on this also. So now we've got a little bit of a gradient going on. And you could also change the control types, you know, so if you want B-splines, whatever, right? And so that it's not a linear fall off. And so, okay, cool. Now you might be saying, okay, what you know, what good is this going to do? And what this lets you do is this node will let you either save these out so you can build your masks later with this data, which is great. So that way when you're shading and stuff like that, you have these masks, or it lets you influence the geometry underneath. So if we were to do a height field distort, which is another great node, and we pipe this in, you have now, let's flag this on. It's not really gonna do much it's just a subtle distortion right now, but the point is that you can target this. And so there's two noise types, and then the amplitude, direction, etc., etc. And then, so like I said earlier, these slots have a mask slot. And so what's cool is now we could plug it in. And so now that we've plugged in the height field distort into the mask, and we used the mask by feature a little while ago to make the slope and the height, and we're going to influence the distortion by having it plugged in to this mask. So as you can see, the mask slot is plugged in to our mask, and our height information is coming in also from further up the pipe. And so right now, where these red marks are, that's the masked out area, and that's actually where this node, or any node really that has a mask slot, you can control where the influence happens. So if I slide up the amplitude, you're going to see that it's only happening in the areas that were a part of our mask. And so this lets you, you know, selectively control specific regions of influence of interest in your terrain. So we're gonna go in here and make some nice little cliff kind of edges. And so let's try 2 here, see what we get. And so we get some stratification going in these areas, and you can, this node has amplitude. It's like a noise node, similar. It has curl and simplex. Curls, this node specifically, I like to use it for this type of stuff, striation on the cliff edges, and So you know you could do this to increase the amplitude of the noise waves. You could change the element size. So as you can see, it makes it bigger or smaller. And so let's get it back to something like this. A little bit of amplitude. Let's drop down the element scale and let's try 0.5. Let's see what we get. And this is X, Y, Z. And so I'm distorting it in the X direction. And let's see. Drop this down. Something like that. Cool. And so we have this influence going on now. And so let's say you wanted to save this out. Like, for example, in the future, we're going to make these cliff edges, this mask, its own texture mask. So we could use this in another render engine or whatever, right? And to do that, because right now, if you middle mouse click here, you will notice that there's only height, and mask data. And so later on, when we decide to export the channels, the maps, we will only have height and mask. And so as we build more masks, we want them to be their own data slots. So in order to do that, let's hit HF. And we'll find, where is it? Mask clear, which is what we're going to need to clear this mask that we have right now, actually. And so if we do that, it gets rid of it, the visual, the mask data, but the height field influence is still there because of this node. We just aren't visualizing the mask anymore because the mask has been erased that we created up here. So up here we still had the mask, and it had data inside of it. And at this point, we still have the same mask, but now there's nothing there. It's empty. And so we could use this to clear it out to build new masks. And that's one way to get rid of it. But we want to actually shuffle this information, this mask information, into another node. So if you hit HF and you do copy layer, I believe. Yeah, this is it. And so what you can do with this is we can move this up or down. It really doesn't matter where you put it, as long as it's connected to this before we clear it. So let's just drop it in here, and nothing's going to change because we're getting the source data mask and we're going to put it somewhere else. So you can move it into already active slots, but for our purposes, we're going to put it in, let's just call it cliffs. And so now we'll have height, mask, and cliffs. And let's just lowercase that. And so now we have basically this mask data. We shuffled it into a new data channel called cliffs. And so now if we, let's do, I don't know, let's try height field blur again. And so let's try to smooth out some of these little valley areas. So let's plug this in. And what's cool is now we've got this height field blur. So let's plug it in. If we plug it in right now, it's just going to blur everything. So if we zoom in here, it's blurring the whole thing, and we don't want that. We want it to influence where it blurs. So what's pretty cool is we don't actually have to use the mask by feature. We could actually override this and use on the side. Right now it's using the masks, so it's blurring this out because we didn't clear the mask. So actually, just so for example, let's just do a height field mask clear just so you could see what happens. Now it's not there's no influence basically. It's all over. And because the mask is being cleared. And you could choose, now that since we added cliffs, we can actually select it, but we're going to clear out the mask. And we're going to make a new mask now. Instead of using the mask by feature, we're going to manually paint it in. And so what's pretty neat is on the side, there's this little like paintbrush looking icon. And you click this, and it'll build you a brand new mask paint node. And so what this node lets you do now is it'll bring up this icon, this little ball, and it'll give you instructions at the bottom. So if you left drag, that's how you draw. And let's actually highlight it so you can see. But we don't want to do that. Well, I guess, I mean, we're going to probably do it here anyway. So that's one of the things you could do, just clicking and dragging. And then if you hold shift and left click, you can increase or decrease the brush. And so you could also, if you notice while I'm doing that, the radius slider also is increasing and decreasing, but it's just more convenient to see what you're doing. And so the layer, it's going to tint the current layer. You can actually choose another one to paint on. So if you want to paint height or mask or cliff that we generated earlier, but we want to stick to mask for now. And so the paint method is to replace the mask we had earlier, but since we cleared it, let's just actually show you what this does. So if I erase both of these, and let's just shake this off, and I pipe that in together, you see we're actually combining the previous mask data that we had and the new mask, because we're influencing mask. And so that's what the mask clear does. It just resets everything. And so we don't want all this anymore. So let's put that back in and wire that back up. So that way we're painting a brand new mask. And so let's paint somewhere around here. And let's just do that. So we got like a nice little valley going or something. And this is going to smoothen out these regions. Work that in a little bit. And let's smoothen this out a little. That's a little too strong. And let's get a... Yeah, that's fine. So, cool. And let's shrink this down and maybe smoothen it a little more there. And so what's going on is now we generated this new mask by painting it in. And so what's cool is now if we turn on height blur, we're actually going to be blurring this masked out region. And so let's increase the blur. And it's already kind of smooth as it is, these areas, but just so you could really go in here and see it. See? And so it's smoothing out that transition. So let's do that. And so that way we smoothened out this area a little more. And so that's what you could do with the paint node. And so some nodes have the option to just click this and it builds you the paint node by itself. You could also just hit HF paint and it's right there, height field paint. And so now let's do some let's do some cliffs. So HF, and underneath HF there is the terrace node. And so what the terrace node does is it basically builds terracing. So let's turn that on. And right now it's using the mask data again. And we actually don't want to use that. So let's mask tint by current layer. Oh, no, yeah. Do that. Turn that on. And Mesa. So we got this new mask data called Mesa. And so right now, that's what this is. And as you can see, if we zoom in, you could see this little terracing going on. And so if you hit compute range, this kind of automatically lets Houdini check, like, okay, what's your minimum, your bottom, and your height, and it'll compute like a, see, like an average range. And so sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. This is way too strong in my opinion. And so what it did is it figured out a minimum and a maximum. So if we drop this down, you can see that the mask starts to move. So let's type in 0 here. And let's work our way down a little bit. Something like that. That's not bad. And you could choose the output layer name. So right now it's outputting Mesa, obviously. And it's actually being influenced by because I made earlier. Let's actually rename this. The mask, I called it Cliffs. Where is it? Copy layer. Yeah, and this is actually using the same data. So let's actually rename this. Copy layer. Let's name this Cliff Mask. And that way it just doesn't overlap. So that way when we're in here, we got Cliff Mask and Cliffs as its own data slot. I could have renamed it here, but just it's better to keep it in with these nodes as their traditional data channels. And so you can smooth in the slope for the cliffs. You could, it's not really doing anything. Output Mesa. Oh, there we go. Smoothing the edges. So if you go all the way down, you get these, let's zoom in here, these really rough kind of edges. And actually, let's do another mask clear just so we can see it. Mask clear. And so we'll visualize it just like this, just gray, but we'll work on this node. And so we could blur it out a little, maybe a little more, less. You can change the terracing steps. We could offset the terracing. And again, this slot, the height field terrace, it also has a mask slot. So again, if we want, we can build a new one. So let's slide this up a little bit, move this out of the way. And let's do another mask clear here. And so now that we've got no mask and we're just terracing the entire image equally, basically, due to these stats, let's actually control where it goes. So again, we could click this little button and let's move this down. So as you can see, our graph is starting to get a little bigger, and so this might be a good point where you start using the sticky notes, and you start labeling stuff like, oh, this is whatever, or you start using these to keep nodes together. So like do this, and I did this in the last tutorial, so we could label this stuff SOP inputs, and that way you could just really start to manage, you know, your terrain, because once these node graphs start getting crazy, we're not going to go that far into it, but just keep that in mind. It's a good idea for organization purposes, and also changing the color to some other stuff, hitting the C key. That's how you do that. And but anyways, let's go back up to, here we are, the mask paint node. And so now we've got this here going on, and we could paint it in basically. So where were we? Terrace, mask paint. Oh yeah, it's not because there's nothing there. It's actually not doing anything. So let's make this let's make this bigger. So let's make some terracing in spots we want it. So like maybe right around here. And as you can see, it's starting to put it there as I paint it in. So maybe right there a little bit, somewhere over here. Let's do some right here. Let's go over here, drop some more down here. Maybe a little bit up here just for kicks. Oh, it's due to the slope on the terrace. It's not influencing it up there. Let's get some right here. Maybe a little bit right here. A little bit right there. And as you can see, it's starting to bog down. And again, that's just because it's a little high quality in certain spots. Let's actually just focus on this. So let's just paint it. That way we don't visualize it live. So let's paint this in here. Let's get a little bit right there. Right there. Pinch over here. Let's make this brush a little bigger, just to get a little better transition. And what's cool is, let's say you want to, we painted this, but you want to get a nice little blurring of your mask. Hit HF again, and underneath mask, you'll see an expand, a noise, a shrink, a blur. So let's blur actually. So let's drop that in between, and we'll blur this mask. Let's visualize. So let's blur it. Let's see. Let's try to blur it by 1,000. That's too much. But as you can see, it blurs it out. So let's try 300. 500. No, 300. And what's cool now is you could add more stuff to this. So HF, blur, mask, noise. And so you could actually add noise to this. So let's visualize it, and it'll add a little bit of noise everywhere. So let's decrease the element size a tad. And let's do a 0.2, maybe 0.5. Okay, so that's cool. And let's try periodic flow. No. Whirly. Yeah, this looks pretty cool. And so now, if we get down back to our terrace, this mask is going to influence where the terracing occurs. So this might take a little bit to cook. and it's too subtle. Let's see. Well, no, it's there. Yeah, so cool. Now we've got this little subtle terracing going on. And you know, the neat thing is you could organize things in different locations. So like let's say I actually wanted this on top of this. All you'd have to do is just reorganize your nodes and move them back down. So the distort, we could just take this out and use it down further here using the mask that we've got up here. So let's try that. So now we lost that, but let's move it down. And since we shuffled the mask up there from just being regular mask to a cliff mask, if we wire this up and we look through it, right now it's on regular mask, but let's change that to cliff mask. And it should fire up. For some reason it's not. Let's see what's going on. Strange. Oh, it's using both, that's why. There we go. And so now it's actually pulling the data that we made earlier, that mask data, and we're layering it on top. But let's actually drop this down. That's way too strong. So something like 10. And what's cool is, let's say you want to bring this down even further. Let's just make another height field paint. And let's wire this up. And this time, instead of painting the mask layer, we're going to paint cliff mask, the one we made earlier. And so let's make this a little bigger and paint it in. Make it even bigger. And we're not really getting much influence. Let's see. We should be getting some influence, but not. It's not really happening too much. For some reason. It's not overpowering everything. Oh, that's why. That's because our distort's above it. Silly. Okay, let's shake that off. Bring this in. And yeah, order matters, so just keep that in mind. There we go. Okay, cool. And so now if we turn off the visualize, we could just not see the red if we don't want to, and paint it in some spots. Let's get it a little more down here. Actually, let's drop a little more down here. And so that way we've got a little variety of blending going on. So we've got that cliffy kind of stuff going on with the ridges, but then we've got also this terracing, this stepping. And let's do a little bit in these spots, just a tad, just to break up the shapes. And just a little bit over here. Okay, cool. And all right, cool. So then those are those nodes. Another really neat node. This is probably the node you should use at the end or near the end of everything is the height field erode. And so this is kind of like a natural erosion simulation, and there's tons of settings in here. And you can choose where to erode, and right now if you just fire it up, there's a visualization tab, and so you don't have to visualize it. And if you compute range, it'll try to give you a best estimate of elevation, stuff like that. And this is just for visualizing purposes. You could, change the colors to whatever. And it's not really meant to be, like your actual shaders and stuff, but it's there to just help you out to see what's going on. You could save this out actually as a shader, but I don't know. I wouldn't bother. And cool. So we've got at least a decent color terrain or whatever, right? And so what this node does is you fill out the adjustments on like what's erodible, how much what's the scale of things, the rate of debris falling, the precipitation, so like water erosion, all that type of stuff. This is something you just got to play around with, the noise, the amount, and you'll figure it out. It's every terrain is unique, so you got to mess with it. But if you hit play, what ends up happening is this. So you get these really cool, really quickly you just banged out all these cool little erosion details and stuff, and it just adds a whole lot more detail and quality to your terrain that we already had kind of building, And so, okay, cool. Let's just say we're happy with this. We like where this is going or whatever. And we want to export this out into something we could use. And you're wondering, okay, like how can I turn this into something? And keep in mind, we could keep getting way crazier, keep adding way more nodes, way more distortion and custom spots, or doing whatever we need to do. And at layering, masks, and just get wild. You can completely customize your terrain however you want. But we're not going to go that far. That's just a lot of work. We're going to drop the grid spacing so we can get some of this detail back. So let's drop the grid spacing to, I don't know, 2. Let's see what happens. And actually, let's save this, because this is probably going to take a little while to cook. And so you didn't see anything change yet, and that's because we're in the middle of a erosion simulation. So to start the erosion over and refresh the resolution, you got to hit back on all your frames, and now press play, and we'll get more quality because we decrease the grid spacing. So if we zoom in here, there's even more detail and stuff going on. And keep in mind, this is just to generate a displacement map. To get the really good tiny details, you're going to be using normal maps, tiling normal maps and stuff like that. But this is just to get the general landscape going. And so let's actually go even higher quality. So let's do a grid spacing of 5,000, 5,000, 2. Let's try 1. 1 might be a tad too slow, but we'll see. We'll see if I crash Houdini or not. And it seems to be okay, so let's rewind that. And it's cooking, so it's taking its sweet time. As you can see, it's a little more detailed now. So let's hit play. And let's go to frame 10. Yeah, this is cool. So if we go in there now, it's the details even finer. And so, okay, cool. We've got this terrain, right? That we custom added mountains into spots, and we added noise, and we chose to break up the shapes and all that stuff. And so what's neat about the erode node is it adds more data channels. So now we have height, the mask that we last had, the cliff mask that we generated earlier using the height field layer copy, the mesa, the cliffs, the bedrock, flow, the flow directions, water, and debris. And so those were just generated, the flow and water, these were all just generated by the erosion node. And so now, if I go in here, and there's several things you could do. You could do like a visualize, so a height field visualize. This lets you completely custom make like what you want to do. So you could visualize certain aspects. So let's just do this real quick. And let's actually not even use, let's just get rid of this, just so that way you can really visualize it. So we've got, this is just plain, and so let's add a layer on here, and let's make this like a bright color so you can better see it. And so if we want to visualize the mask data, I think I cleared it actually earlier. Yeah, I cleared it right here, so there's nothing in there right now. And visualize cliff mask, there's our cliff mask data. If I visualize mesa, these are mesa masks. Cliffs, so this is just strictly these little cliff edges. Visualize bedrock, which is the more the mountain. Flow, which is the flow of water. Flow direction, if you want to do things in a single direction. Water, obviously, that pooled. And debris that would accumulate. And so you for free get all these really cool channels already that we could save out. And what's great is, let's actually make one more mask since we're missing one. So let's do a HF mask by feature. And let's drop that in right here. And so let's actually turn off, let's get away from that. And on the erode, let's turn off visualization. And so on the mask by feature, right now we're doing slope. Let's do something else. I don't know. Let's do flat areas. So something like that. So maybe these are like grasslands or something. And let's give these a nice little blend. And let's actually get the interpolation, and let's do these as B-spline. That way we get a nice little fall off on the curve. And let's bring one up all the way right there. Okay, cool. So now that way we got this little blending going on the edges. And so we've got all this new mask we just generated, and we could leave it as mask, or we could rename it. So again, using the HF layer, copy layer. If we were to plug this in right here, we can rename this from mask. Let's name this data channel grassland or something. And so now if we come back down here, and we visualize, we'll have grassland right at the bottom. And so instead of using debris now, let's erase that. And actually, should probably do a oh, and you can invert the mask too. I forgot to mention that earlier. But actually, let's clear that mask so we're not visualizing it again. So height field mask clear. So that way we're back to just a blank slate and we're only visualizing what we choose. So now if we choose grassland, boom, that data channel's right there and we can visualize it. And okay, so you might be wondering, okay, now how do we export all these channels and all this data and stuff? And so there's several nodes to do this. And so if you type in HF output, this node is basically for outputting your layer data. So if we turn that on, what we get here is we get a file name. So you can call this whatever, right? And let's just drop this in here as, and I'll be including these in a zip file for everyone to kind of experiment with. And let's call this Patreon height tutorial, or Patreon Houdini terrain. Let's just call it that, accept. And so basically you could choose a format, 32-bit float, 16-bit float, RGBA, packed, deep, single channel if you only want to do a single channel, basically. 1 by 1. RGBA lets you save at least several of these data channels in one shot, which is useful. And you could divide it into tiled maps. So if you turn this on, how many, the size of each tile it's going to cut out. But we're not going to do that. And so for our purposes, let's make the alpha, we're going to make it the height channel. No remapping. Or actually, since we want a high quality displacement, let's not do it this way. We're gonna duplicate this. So now there's 2. And so this one, we're gonna name this just height .exr, and we'll make these JPEGs just to save space. And so these we only need to be 8-bit because these are going to be just textures, like visual textures. But our displacement, we actually want 32-bit so that you have more variation. And so for this, we're going to just choose a single channel, and we're going to just use height. And for this output, we're going to output each of these as their own thing. So let's just do cliff, the mesa, the minor cliffs, and let's just do flow. And so each of these is going to be its own data channel. So we need more, so let's just duplicate this now. And actually, come to think of it, JPEG won't be able to support this data in its own. Well, no, yeah, it should. Let's see what happens. And actually, JPEG doesn't have an alpha, so let's actually just do RGBA. And for this one, we'll let's actually turn this to RGB. For this one, we'll turn on, let's get rid of all this and turn on, where were we? flow. Let's delete that. Delete that. Let's get water. Let's get grassland. And let's do one more. Might as well just get all this data out. So let's delete that, delete that, delete that. And let's do flow direction X. And let's do debris. Yeah, let's just do that. And we'll leave blue off. And so you can change the resolution on these if you check this on. What it does, if you don't check that on, it's based on the resolution you set way up here when you first started. So 5,000 by 5,000. And you could override that. But I think 5,000 by 5,000 is plenty huge, so we'll leave that as is. And yeah, okay, cool. So now if we want to output these, all you gotta do is just click save to disk. And so let's do that. So if I load up our Patreon folder, here we go. Here's the JPEG. And so it's all these, it's the fruity weird colors, so it's green and red. And the whole point is that we're gonna, when we bring this into Maya or whatever app, instead of using the entire diffuse color channels, we're just gonna use R or B or whatever, right? You could, like I said earlier, you could save these each one by one and you'll have a bunch of these and it'll only be that data. But you know, why bother when we can have one image storing multiple data sets? And so let's render the next one. Oh, I forgot to label it. I should have actually done that. So let's label this r.flow x, and the next that way we know when we load it up what is what. And so then green dot debris. And so that way now, let's render this. The naming convention will know, like, oh, okay, the R channel is flow in the X, the green channel is debris. And that just will save us time. Just having this info in there. And again, proper naming convention is always good. So R is flow, G is water, and blue is grassland. Hit enter, save that to disk. And so now we've got this data right here. And so let's just, you know, continue doing that. And so this one is our cliffs mask. G is mesa. And B is cliffs. And so we'll save this to disk. And that's this data. And so now we've got height field. This is going to probably take a little longer because it's 32-bit EXR. And so wait a second for that. And it's done. Okay, cool. And so we've generated our maps now using the masks and all the other stuff we built and the erode channel information. And now you might be saying, okay, we've got the height field displacement, so we can actually just use this to make a height field of this. But let's say you need, for some reason, a polygon export, right? So you type in HF convert. And so the convert height field node, if we bring this up, and wire it in. What this will do is it converts, and this is probably, yeah, this is going to take a while. It converted the data into polygons. So you can see there's tons of little quads. And so this is a 350 meg data set versus, what do we have over here? 61 megs. And that's just because this is volume data and this is an actual mesh. And so what's cool about this is, you know, you could choose which one you want to export. Obviously, you're going to want height. You can convert it to polygon, a polygon soup, a VDB. Do you want quads, triangles? We're going to stick to quads. You can bake the point color info, and you do that if you had a visualize node, and so we're not visualizing anything. But if we did, let's turn these on. As you can see, if you turn on visualize and stuff, it'll bake the point data. But we're using masks, so we don't have to do all that. So let's just turn that off. And you can extrude the base. So if you turn this on, instead of being a one polygon thick object, and this is going to take a little bit to cook. Now it's got a little bit of thickness, as you can see. And you might need to do this for different purposes. Depends. And you know, if you're going to 3D print this, you obviously need it to be solid and stuff. And so you can increase or decrease the depth. You can flatten the base, which is why it's flat down here. You can do a lot of stuff. And it automatically prepares the UVs and all that. So it's a 0 to 1 UV space, so your maps will just work. But we're not going to extrude the base, so let's turn that off. And yeah, that about covers all the basic stuff you need to know. So let's say you wanted to I don't know, resample the quality or something. There's there's way more nodes in here, like the height field file node. This is a great one. Height field file basically lets you import data. So let's say you had, I don't know, like a DEM file from the web, or you sculpted something, or you made it in TerraGen and you exported a height map or a world machine, whatever. All you got to do is just load it up, and you just point, you point to the direction where it is, and it loads it up, and just like that, you converted that height field data into one of these Houdini terrain sets, and then you could, start tweaking it and adding more stuff and getting creative. And there's other nodes that I haven't covered, but these are things you got to just experiment. There's like the pattern node. The resample node's pretty important. This lets you basically resample the mesh, the resolution that's coming in. And so if you want to blur it, if you want to make it not as sharp, and you want to increase the resolution scale or decrease it, this just lets you, tweak it on the fly instead of having to go all the way back up there. There's also the we already covered project, scatter. This one's important, but I'd rather cover this in the future, just because eventually when we get around to scattering, we'll want to use this node. And so what the scatter node lets you do, let's just drop it in here. And actually, let's unhook that. Let's plug it in right here. And so what this node lets you do is you can scatter points depending on the mask channel you got. So the reason you'd want to do this, let's just do a merge, is say you've got your geometry and you want to scatter. Why is this giving me an error? Mismatch of attributes detected. Some attributes may not be. Oh, need normal. And so let's just drop in normal here. So let's say tons of quads. You wanted to scatter points. That might have been too much. Let's try 1,000. Scatter some points on, I don't know, water. Let that cook. See, now we've actually got points here right in the water data channel. So what this is useful for is, let's say you want to scatter trees or certain things in specific areas. You could use this to then build points based on the data channels that we've got available. And so again, I'll be covering this later in the future. You could do it this way, or with the masks that we actually generated, you could scatter using a attribute file. And so attribute from map would basically do the same thing, except we'd be loading in our channel data, and so we'd build an attribute that we'd be then scattering points on and stuff. But for now, let's deal with that. And so yeah, that's what you could do with this. But let's delete these two, and let's just export this polygon mesh. So convert file. I actually should have already done it. So let's do a file to export. Yeah, and wire that up. And so now we gotta just, instead of read, but let's actually place it somewhere first. Let's why is it location hip? Yeah, okay. Let's name this I don't know, terrain dot obj, and error, terrain dot obj, and oh yeah, it's an error because it's trying to read. So let's do write, and this is probably going to take a couple seconds. And pretty sure it didn't crash, it's just writing the data out. And it's a pretty big mesh, so it might take a while. And yeah, it's starting to build it, and there it is. So 150 megs, not huge, but it's there now. And like I said, I'll include all this stuff so you guys, including this Houdini file, so you guys can play around with it and see what you can do. And so let's actually bypass this, because I don't want you guys to be loading it every time you open up your scene, so you don't have to deal with all the polygon stuff. And on the visualize, we'll just delete these, so that way you guys can visualize whatever you want on your own. So we'll just let Cliff, or no, nothing. That way it's blank when you guys load up the scene. And okay, cool. So now that we've got all our texture maps, our masks rendered out, and we've got a height field so we could use displacement, right there, and we also got an OBJ. Let's take this into Maya and lay out the terrain, get some redshift renders going. And you could do the same thing here. If you the problem actually is, if you try to render this right now, actually let me make a redshift ROP. So if you try to render this with redshift, what's gonna happen is nothing. So if I do this, it's just not gonna read the data. And the reason being is that it's just something Redshift can't read. And so the way around this is you could either turn it into polygons like I did, and then visualize this as the final node on your OBJ, and it will see it. But then you're cooking all these operations, so you're better off just exporting it like I did as an OBJ, and then you just import it as a new object. So then you just go up. Let's just not visualize this. Let's go to File, and let's point this to our terrain OBJ. Give it a second to load it up. And as you can see, now it's in here. So if we were to quickly just drop down, where's it at? Oh, and actually, speaking of the point thing, what's cool is since we still have this height field still here, we could actually use the point data and scatter our tree assets or whatever on top of this without actually having to rebuild the polygon, since we're bypassing it and we're just loading it here. But we're going to use probably maps in the future, and in Maya we'll just use mash and maps. But okay, so anyways, where was I? Let's drop a Redshift sun, and let's bring that up. Let's drop the angle down something like that. Let's go, and actually, I'm not sure if this has normals or not. Let's check. It looks like it does, but let's see. It might not render right if it didn't bake out the normals. But let's what else? Let's go to the Redshift out, and in the Redshift ROP, let's just turn on brute force. Let's fire up a test render, see if it's actually rendering. And under mat, let's just build a material, RS material. Let's flag it. Let's drop it in. And it looks like it's reading it. Cool. Yeah, it's reading. It's reading it in. And so I'll just give a quick demo on how to put the shaders together. And so let's just do a color layer. And actually, let's do a material scene material builder. So let's do a RS material builder. Let's delete this. Oh. Or actually, let's just cut this. Drop it in here. And connect the surface output. Let's go back up a layer. Drop it on there. And let's, oh, there we go. And so if we do a layer color, and we'll just drop this into our diffuse slot just to keep it simple. And right now the base color is black, but let's try something like gray. And let's stop that and then hit render again. So it updates. Since I just dropped this node down, it's probably not going to update. There we go. Okay. So let's do a texture. And we're going to load up just two textures real quick to matte. Actually, no, we just, yeah. So we'll just have these as masks. So we'll do cliff mask. And we'll actually, let's do some math. vector. Min max vector vector rush vector. Add vector bias. Change the range. And on this, we want it to be our mask. So, layer 1, mask. And so right now we're deleting everything, which shouldn't be what's going on. Normal, yep, yep. Remap, adjust. Let's oh. Let's actually shake this off. What's going on here? And so yeah, basically now we're getting some of that mask data in, but it's not controlled since it's both. So what we need to do actually is a remap. So a vector. This is one of the things I wish was easier in Houdini, or change range, I mean. And in Maya, all I'd have to do is just output the red channel. But here we gotta control that. So let's drop this in between, and it's not going to look like it does anything yet, but let's turn off. This is RGB, and so if we turn off that influence and we increase this to, I don't know, 10, you see we get the equivalent of that pass. So you could go get creative and, you know, increase this further. Let's try 50. And yeah, you get the idea. And we're basically, by doing this, we're controlling the strength. And so now let's move this to the side. So like, let's say we wanted a different color in here. I don't know. Let's zoom in. Let's actually render a little bigger square. And so let's actually change our base color. So let's do something a little more like bedrock or something. More rockish. And now using that mask that we generated earlier, we're going to change this to, like, I don't know, let's try green. And as you can see, we could tweak the range. So if we just put the 1 on here, it's a lot more subtle. Put 10 on here. You know, it's a little stronger. And so this texture file, which is let me check. It's only got RGB channels. So what's cool is we could actually duplicate this. So right now this is using the B channel. Oh no, the G channel, I mean. So let's drop this down, make another one, and make another one. And so let's turn this off, and let's use the B channel. Oh, 0. And turn this on, so this is blue, and let's put 10 on this. And on this one, let's turn all these off, and let's turn on 10 on this. And so this is the red channel now. And so now we could wire this up. So let's enable another channel. It's going to turn all black right now because we don't have a mask. But if we output that and input that into layer 2 mask, now we've masked out that region. So let's turn on layer 3 and let's output that into layer 3 mask. And let's now change the color. So let's and the order matters too, just so you know. So actually, let me see, since this is stacked on top, let's just turn on red. So you can see that cliff edge is getting that color. So let's try for these cliffs something a little rocky. Let's make it darker. And for these, let's just go a little lighter. And so again, you know, keeping in mind that the numbers influence the strength of things. So 50, spread it, you know, spread it out more. 1 would barely influence it. Let's try 5. 3. 5 looked cool. And on this, you know, we could try 25. And so yeah, you guys, you know, you get the idea. And so let's actually sample this color. And instead, we'll maybe saturate a little more and lighten it a tad, or maybe darken it. Let's go with lightening it. And yeah, so as you can tell, basically this lets you just start layering up all this data that we've got going on. And the way you could mix it, you know, add, subtract, multiply, difference, all that stuff. And then we could just keep adding more and more and more. So if we were to bring in, let's just duplicate this, but this time we'll use another texture. We'll use flow, water, and grass. Let's just see what happens. And so red is flow. So if we add another one and we output this into layer 4, we'll get these little pockets. So maybe we want to do something, I don't know, some blue. And so I'll desaturate that a little. And maybe let's add another one and output that and see what this is. So this looks like the flow. So let's sample the dirt, but maybe we'll brighten it, or maybe we'll darken it. Maybe we'll move it to the greens. And yeah, you know, as you keep building it up, you can really start to get some interesting stuff going. And I mean, these are just masks I'm using, and I'm just using color swatches. For real terrain, you would, instead of using a color swatch, you would import a tiling texture map or something, right? But I mean, just using this, you already start to kind of get some cool stuff. So maybe the order on those should change. So, you know, maybe I pipe up this one instead to, what slot is this? Slot 1. And then slot 1 goes to to slot 5. And you know, we keep just playing with stuff. So desaturate this, move it into the yellow. Or maybe let's keep it saturated. Just darken it. And let's move this more into the green. Go a little saturated a bit. And yeah, as you can see, you could just start, you know, building it up and building it up. And so let's do one more layer. Do the output. And is this not layer 7? Oh, layer 6, wrong layer. Let's cut that. Go to layer 6. And maybe with this, we'll, I don't know, try another set of color, but and yeah, you know, just keep in mind the order matters, so I probably should have had the water on top at the end. But, well, actually, let's just do that right now. And maybe the erosion should have gone first, and, you know, experiment with stuff, you know, you could get some cool results. So let's see, layer 4. Let's, instead of doing layer 4, we'll do layer 5. To layer 7. And we'll turn off layer 4 for now. Turn on layer 7. And we'll make this that watercolor. And yeah, you know, as you can see, really quickly we start building it up. And right now there's reflection because of the RS material. So if we drop this down, and obviously if you wanted to get more complicated, you would be making this with layered shaders, layered material, you know, not just a color layer. You'd be layering different shaders so that the water's reflective and the grass is, you know, the terrain is, the rocks aren't as reflective, and et cetera, et cetera. That way you could really get creative with it. And yeah, so let's actually just do a quick little final render just for fun. So let's create a camera. And let's go to the object level. Select our camera. Put the camera parameters on. Go to redshift. Turn on the photographic exposure. And let's hit re-render again. Let's increase the overexposure and the black crush. And let's increase this to 0.8, just for fun. See what happens. Oh. And let's move our sun around. Where is it at? There it is. And let's fire up a separate window IPR. And let's just move around. Let's have this on top. Always on top. And let's select our sun and move it around. Let's go for a sunset. Cool. And let's go to our camera. Lock it. And move around and see what we get. So this is cool. And so what's neat about this is all procedural. You could tweak it. Obviously, like I said, you would be using textures, not just like a green color swatch, because that only goes so far, right? And you'd be using, we'd scatter trees, and you could have even open VDB clouds and just go nuts. But this is just like the basics of how to build a terrain using all these tools. And so, this is, if you were to have this terrain in a distance like this, and you have several of these, and you have your hero assets and stuff in the foreground, you can make some really cool stuff. So if I were to duplicate this, let's just pause the IPR, get the IPR out of the way. And this might take a second since it's a pretty heavy polygon mesh. And I move this around. We rotate it. Oh. And maybe we scale it a bit, or who knows. Just move it around. Let's rotate it. Let's duplicate it again. Duplicate it again. Let's 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 d So the idea is that you'll have all these laid out and for your shots, and you'll have different versions and stuff like that, or you'll art direct them specifically for your needs. So something like this, I don't know, get in there and try that out, see what we get. And yeah, all this is just a duplicated terrain. And yeah, sure, it's not crazy detailed in there, like I said, because that's something you're going to use normal maps and bump maps and tiled textures and stuff like that. But for just color swatches, I mean, it's not bad. Yeah, I mean, look at that. Cool. Cool results. And so, yeah, next I'm gonna actually go into Maya right now and show the rest of this, how this is all done, and just a version in there so you guys can see how I shade it. And so let's pause the video and load up Maya, and I'll continue there. Hey guys, before I jump into the Maya tutorial, I just want to mention that I went ahead and up-resed the scene. So the file, the Houdini file you guys are gonna get, I just went ahead and up-resed everything, and so you're seeing a lot more little details and stuff like that. And I actually worked on the graph a little bit so that way you guys can figure out easier. So like labeling stuff, so the inputs, purple nodes mean mask data, and visualizing nodes so you can visualize the data and stuff. Some editing of the masks. I basically just went ahead and organized some things, and let me actually re-input this, and that's about it. I just went ahead and organized things, and when you guys eventually get to wanting to visualize the data, that's what this node is for. And so if you just go on and turn on, I don't know, flow direction X or something, you'll and the reason why I didn't up-res this during the tutorial originally is just because, as you can see, it's cooking all the data, and that takes time. And so here we go. Now with the visualize node, we're visualizing the flow direction X and stuff. And so you guys can check out all the channels, and you'll see how I edited all this data, the masks, to be customized to heights and stuff like that. And so I just went ahead and worked on it a little bit further. And I'll leave this saved as is. It might take a little bit for you guys to open up the file. And I disabled for now the geometry output. So right now they're bypassed, and that's just because this can take forever. If you're right now, I have the geometry set to only 0.20, so 25% of the original quality, and that's because I tried making the geometry a full 1:1, and it's too huge. It's 3 gigs. It's gonna take forever to just upload onto the Patreon. So I'd rather just you guys make your own, however high quality. I'm gonna upload a 25% or a 20% version, and that's the one I'll take into Maya, and you guys can make it as detailed as you guys want. And let me actually just organize these nodes. And so pretty much, yeah, I just went ahead and organized all the node structure and data just so that way you guys will have an easier time navigating everything, and I increase the quality so there's more details and stuff like that going on. And I've got the geometry to load in also, the 25% one. So if we disable this and enable, and let's just do a little render, a test render, we'll load in that geometry with a shader that I made. And so as you can see, this is just a basic color swatch shader that I made, and that info is underneath Matt under the Redshift VOPNet, and so you'll see how I imported the texture maps and broke up the RGB values and imported and layered it up and all that type of stuff. And so you guys will have access to that too. And but initially I'll have this disabled, so you'll load it up, point your direction to it yourself. I'm gonna just bypass it just because for performance purposes I don't want you guys loading up a huge file as soon as you open up everything, and so I'll just leave it at the height field data, and this will take however long it takes to cook, and eventually it'll open up on your computer. And yeah, that's about it covering the Houdini stuff. And so I'm gonna, like I said, I exported a lower quality version of this terrain, and I'll be using these maps and putting it all together in Maya, and you guys have fun with it and explore each node and see how I got the erosion and all that type of stuff that we went through, except this is just a more organized node graph and higher res simulation and stuff that might take a little longer, but that's why I didn't bother doing it for the live tutorial, just because it would take too long cooking these nodes and stuff. So alright guys, hey, what's up guys? So now we're in Maya, and we're gonna import the stuff we've built. So there's two ways you could do this. You could do this with the height map, which is probably the lighter way of doing this. Instead of bringing in heavy geometry, using a height map usually is the lighter way of doing things. And but for our purposes, we're just gonna throw in the geometry and just speed things up. So and this is the 25% quality geometry, so it's not too heavy. I think it's in the million poly range, which is decent. It's heavy but not super heavy. 100,000 would be better. That would be the quality range that's pretty good, and then you displace the details in and stuff. So here we go, we got our terrain ready to go, and it's still pretty dense, but it's not crazy dense. And let's get some materials going. So let's select our terrain, and actually I think Redshift's not loaded, so let's load up Redshift, or make sure it's loaded. Actually, yeah, it's not loaded, so let's fire up Redshift. And okay, now it seems to be loaded. Let's just keep it simple. We'll just use a Redshift physical sun and sky. So let's swap over to Redshift. Let's change the output. Let's just create physical sun sky. We'll bring that up, and let's just zoom in on it actually, and yeah, that's cool. That's cool direction. Zoom back out, and let's turn on GI. Let's turn on automatic memory management, and let's just clear our hypershade, and let's move this out of the way for now. So basically, we're going to just assign a good old redshift material. And we're not going to go super complicated and use the material blender and stuff like that. You guys can explore all that. I'm going to kind of just go over the basics. And so we're going to layer the with the redshift color layer. We're going to pipe this into the diffuse. And on the diffuse, for now, let's just turn off reflection completely. And we'll start to import our masks. So we have 3 JPEGs that we made earlier using our data. So we'll bring those in. Let's move this out of the way. And let's move these over here. And so something that I think is easy about Maya is we could just do this and pull each channel out. So that makes it a little easier for this type of stuff where you have a mask that you're pulling data from each channel. And let's see. Let's check out what we got. So this is the flow X and the debris. Let's do a proper ordering. And cliff mask, mesa and cliffs, water and grassland. So if we want to layer this up properly, so let's try to do that. And for now, we'll use a tiled texture. So we've got these tiled textures right here, and let's try just, I don't know, rock, and let's check out the color. 4K. It's pretty big, but yeah, let's use this. So we'll drop this in, and this will be our base color. And of course, you wouldn't want to layer these shaders are their own. They'd be their own like roughness and all that. So you would actually want to layer with the redshift material blend, but you know that's just an extra hassle because then we got to tweak each RS material, and we're not going to do all that. That's like another 2 hours. So let's just keep this simple. And so we'll just pipe this into the base color. And so if I let's just try an IPR real quick and see what happens. Might take a second because this is pretty heavy geometry. And weird, it's completely black. Why is that? For color, sRGB. Strange. It should not be completely black. Is there? Oh, that's why. We have one layer turned on. Okay, there we go. Turned off that layer. And so, as you can see, it's pretty bright out. Let's turn down, or actually let's just throw on another color space. See if it helps out a little. No, it's a little too strong. So let's go to the camera. And does this have it on? Nope, it doesn't. So it's in the settings. So let's tweak the photographic exposure. Right now it's a little too strong. Let's see if I bring this down. It's 1 f-stop. It should be okay. So let's drop that down to, or actually up an f-stop. No, yeah, up an f-stop. Let's try another, up one more. So let's try 10, 11. Yeah, this is cool. Okay, so we've got this terrain. If we go in here, it's too big. So let's tile this a little bit. Let's go down and under UV coordinates, or not UV, under the place 2D texture. I mean, let's tile it. I don't know. Repeat twice. See how it looks. These are really nice, high quality textures, by the way. The Real Displacement group, he actually loaned me, well, didn't loan me, but he gave me these textures so I could kind of like tell you guys about them. And so they're really good. They come with displacement and depth and gloss and all that normal. So they're really, really nice, high quality textures, and I highly recommend them. They tile beautifully. And I'll probably cover doing that nicely eventually, but for now we're just, quick layer setup for a terrain and stuff. And so okay, cool. Let's do our next layer. So let's layer up something else on here. Let's try see what ground looks like. So color. Yeah, this looks kind of cool. So let's bring this in. And let's try putting this onto our first layer. So layer 1 color. And it's going to take over, obviously. And actually, let's maybe drop. No, yeah, I guess that's low enough. I was going to say let's lower the render settings a bit. And let's turn on layer 1. And so obviously we're getting that way too big. We don't want them that big. But this is a cool texture to have. So let's mask this texture out with maybe flow, water, cliffs maybe. Let's do cliffs. So let's use the R channel, which is r.cliffmask. That's why we labeled these that way. And let's pipe that in to layer 1 mask. And let's see what we get. So yeah, we're masking out now only our cliff. So we really got to tile that. So let's change that to, I don't know, something like 5. See what happens. Let's try 10. Let's actually zoom in here. So maybe we'll swap these. Actually, we'll make this our base, and we'll make this our layer 1 color. So let's move this up. Let's move this down. And let's make this our layer 1 color. Maybe, maybe not. No, I think this is better for a base. So let's keep that there. And the color is just way too off on these. So maybe I'll just use color correct. Or correct. Redshift color correction. And you usually want to keep these in the same family but of textures. So this looks like a deserty kind of texture, and the other one isn't, so it might not work, but it's worth trying. So let's see, layer 1 color, and let's adjust the hue on this. Let's see if we can get it to look a little more yellow. Something like that, maybe. It's a little too red still. It's too green now. So maybe right around there. Let's maybe increase the saturation to 2 and just see what happens. Okay, where we're getting these cool blue shapes, which I kind of like. And maybe increase the contrast, decrease the contrast. Yeah, something like that maybe. Alright, cool. And let's tile our base layer actually a little bit more. So let's tile this by 4. See what happens to the base. Okay, cool. And let's move these two to the side. And again, you can make this, you know, sci-fi as hell. Like you could use totally weird colors. I'm just gonna just use basic, more earthy tones. And what's cool is you could actually use the alpha and lower this, and it'll kind of blend it in. So if I completely do that, it completely got rid of it. So let's keep it somewhere like this. I actually like it to be a little lighter on the edges. So something like that. And you can choose different blend modes, just like Photoshop. There's multiply and all that stuff. Actually, this multiply looks kind of cool. Let's check. Yeah, this looks good. I like this multiply. Maybe we'll increase the alpha a little bit. No, it's too strong. Let's bring it back. Okay, cool. And you know, these textures come with normal maps also, so I could plug those in. But since we're not doing multiple shaders, you can only plug in one normal map, so I'm not going to bother, you know. But just imagine if you had multiple shaders for each of these surfaces, and you would have a normal map for the cliffs, a normal map for everything else, and that would just give you that extra little detail down here, you know, little bumps and stuff. But the texture's already doing a pretty good job on top of the polygon quality. And so and that's how you can get away with a lot of detail when you're using DEM data from like satellites and stuff. It'll be a low quality mesh, and it'll just look good. So all right, cool. Let's try another layer. So let's turn that on, and obviously it's going to go black. So maybe let's do a cliff mask, or just cliffs. Or no, let's try Mesa. Let's see what we get. And so let's layer 2 mask. There we go. Plug that in. And okay, so now we're seeing where the black is falling there. And you could remap these values or ramp them. So if I, for example, drop a ramp texture, let's just delete this, and we plug this in right into the U, and we plug this output. You can't do it as color since it's one channel data, so we plug it in like this. It'll disappear, but if we do this, you could control the data. We should be able to. What's going on here? Ah, there we go. Since I plugged it into the U, if I were to plug it into V instead, you want to make sure that the data type is on V. So now that we're controlling this, you could control the value. So if I slide this way, you know, we're getting a little less. Slide it this way, we're getting more. So this kind of lets you tweak the data, massage the data a little more. But we'll just, you know, this is just good to know. And then you could add noise to this too. So if I go in there and down here, you could turn on noise, and it'll add a little extra noise. See, so you could get some pretty interesting results. And we'll move this way. Move this way. So that's kind of cool. All right, so now let's I don't know. Let's see. Maybe we could reuse the texture we used up here. So let's maybe reuse the this rock one. Or no, that's the base. Let's reuse this one. So let's move this up here, move this down here. And let's plug this in and reuse the color data. So we'll plug this into layer 2 color now. And we're getting that blue stuff again, which is kind of cool. But let's see if we what happens if we multiply this again. So let's drop the alpha a bit. Let's zoom out. Cool. But maybe regular is a little better. I don't know. I kind of like that blue stuff. So let's. Yeah, I kind of like that blue. It just kind of breaks up the forms a tad. Gives it that water kind of look. So, all right, cool. Even though that's supposed to be a mesa, I kind of like this scattered blue. And so, okay, let's move on to our next layer. So let's turn on layer 3. And this time we'll use the cliff data. Or actually, maybe we'll use something else. Let's see, flow and X. Let's try debris. Debris or flow. So debris is G. So on layer 3 mask, let's oh, G. Let's see what we get. So now we're getting this darker debris field kind of stuff, where the debris from the simulation is accumulating. And for this, let's try multiply, see what we get. Maybe a darker greenish kind of color, like yellowy green. Really saturate that and darken it. Let's rotate around, and so that's cool. We're getting some cool little deposits. Yeah, I could dig that. So let's do another layer. And let's open up layer 4. Let's enable this. And this time we'll try we'll just try the regular flow. Move this down. And we'll pipe into what is it? Flow is R channel. So mask. So this is way too much flow, but you know, it's kind of cool looking too. So let's try just green. Yeah, this is pretty neat. So we'll leave this green. And now we'll turn on channel or layer 5. And this time we'll layer our grassland. So that's a blue. on top. So layer 5 mask. And we'll try more of a green, a rich green. Maybe we'll move it to the yellows, see what we get. That's kind of cool. Let's maybe saturate it a little more. Let's go up and maybe change the flow green. Desaturate it a tad, or maybe saturate it more and see what we get. Oh, that's too much. And as you can see, you know, just using these maps that we built, you could start to get some cool results. So yeah, this green's a little too too green. Let's go more to the browns. Let's lighten it a tad. That's kind of cool. And let's make this a little more of the rich green. Yeah, there we go. Let's darken that a tad. Desaturate it a bit. All right. So now we're getting, you know, some variety in there. And actually, let's go up a little bit and let's maybe change this to something else. Let's try a rockier color, or like a sand. Yeah, maybe like a sand. Yeah, that's cool. So now we got these little pockets of yellowy, sandy looking colors. And okay, cool. Let's go to layer 6 now. And let's zoom out. And so for layer 6, we'll save water for last. And what do we got here? RG. Let's try flow in X direction. So that's R. So layer 6 mask goes into R. And so this should give us flow, but it's only on the X direction of the plane. And so for this, maybe let's increase it. Maybe like it's like sand or something. That's kind of cool. Let's zoom in here and see. See what we're getting. Maybe average. Multiply. Divide. Well, that's actually not that bad with the white. Let's see what we get from a distance. That's cool. Kind of, I like the direction where that's going. It's like exposed rock, even though the color's too strong, but I kind of like that. So let's try overlay. Let's see. Maybe screen. Okay, screen looks kind of cool. Yeah, something like that. And so it's kind of blending a little bit of that color with the green flow that we had underneath. And so let's drop down the exposure just to see what we're looking like. All right, let's see. Let's try, what else do we have left? Cliff mass, mesa, cliffs. We haven't done the cliffs strictly, but I don't think we'll need them. Let's try the water. So that'll be our last layer. which is at the limit, layer 7. So let's pipe that in to layer 7, and we'll make this nice blue. So if we zoom in here, we should have, yeah, these little pockets of blue. Let's deepen them. Cool. And so now we've got this completely procedural built terrain, custom art directed with the mountains where we placed them. And you know, they don't have to be mountains. You could sculpt your own shapes and get crazy. We've got all this procedural maps generated to get all this color data and stuff in there. And of course, these are just color swatches. I mean, think about that. This is just color, except for the base terrain, which was the texture. So I mean, if you really want to get crazy with it, you'll tile onto these green colors stuff, and you know, you'll get crazy. And yeah, so this is kind of like a nice solid foundation, you know. And so let's tweak the sun. So let's try different directions and see what we get. Let's go more towards a sunset. Let's move it a little bit that way. Zoom in. And let's put this in a object space. And actually we should save. Probably should have saved this earlier. So where's our Patreon? Houdini. And yeah, I'll give this a name real quick. Patreon, Houdini, Terrain, Maya, RS, Shading. So let's save that. And so let's put this in object space just so I can rotate this a little better. So okay, cool. Let's we've got a nice little, more of a sunset lighting. Let's actually look for the sun. And I'll build, I think I should next time share a scene that's designed just for outdoor stuff, just so I don't have to keep building this for you guys. But I just recommend, you know, you guys tweak the sun intensity, the softness, the size, how the ozone is. So if there's a lot of ozone turbidity, I mean, the ground color. And so the ground color influences the lighting of the sky. And so right now it's this brownish, the stock default color. And so if we change this to something a little more like our terrain, it'll have a little bit of an influence. As you can see underneath, the color of the ground is influencing the terrain. And so let's do a horizon blur too. That way it just blends a little better. Let's try 1. Let's try 2. And that's just, you know, to blur the horizon a little bit. And let's actually raise it a little bit so it's not too sunset looking. And actually, where's the there's a softness of the light. Sun intensity, sun to scale, glow intensity. Where's that at? Or actually, that's because I'm using the physical sun sky instead of a directional light. So if we wanted to do a totally different light setup, let's disable this. Oh, here it is, the softness. So let's actually turn that on. Instead of using an HDR, we'll just do this, and we'll increase the light's shadow softness. And that's not something you really notice too much, but it's there. It makes a difference. And let's see. Let's expose for the ground also. And actually, we'll scatter some stuff on there just real quick, just to see what happens. You know, we'll see. Let's allow the exposure to get blown out, because we want the sky to blow out. And let's increase the black crush a tad. And let's expose for the ground. Let's try 15. Alright, this looks cool. So if we maybe move the sun just a tad. Cool. So now we've got a pretty decent, terrain already going, and we don't even have separate shaders. We don't have normals. We don't have, it's pretty basic still. But this is plenty to already get some cool results. So I mean, if all you got to do is just start scattering some open VDB clouds on here, start scattering assets like trees, and before you know it, you got some pretty cool results. And duplicate the terrain in the distance. And let's actually pause this and maybe we'll try to grow some stuff on here. Let's save. Or actually, let's turn on some volumes. That's what we need. Right now we need a little bit of haze. So under atmosphere, create an atmosphere. And let's fire up the IPR again. And we'll turn on the emission. And the attenuation just a bit. See what happens. 0.01. 0.001. So let's use let's keep it at 0.01 for now. Let's use a color that'll work. So like maybe a little blue. That's cool. And let's go 0.5. And let's actually remove the influence from the environment, or at least tone it down. So that way we still get our sky. This is what you want to do if you have an HDR and you don't want the fog to influence it. You just drop that down, turn it off. Let's find an angle. I think the fog is still too strong, so let's try 0.2. That's cool. It's subtle enough, but it's there. Alright, and so let's try scattering some stuff on here. So let's move that out of the way. And we'll hit redshift, proxy, create, and oh man, I gotta remember where I put it. The redshift forest. Is it in here? Proxy, proxy, proxy. Nope. I know I got it somewhere around here. Because I don't want to use a full heavy proxy, so I'm going to use something a little lighter. This one should do fine. Yeah, we'll use this one. It's not too heavy. I should probably have paused the IPR before bringing that in. So let's kill the IPR. And let's center the pivot. Let's move it over here to 0 world space. Let's shrink it. And I'll go into detail of how to scatter stuff some other time. But for now, I'm just going to do a quick little mash scatter just to see what we get. And let me see if this is even showing up. So let's IPR this. Oh, great. Why is it saying there's another render in progress? Oh, okay, cool. It's there. I don't think the textures are reading right on this tree. I think they're reading as ACES, and I'm not using ACES right now. So that's probably why that's doing that. But okay, I guess I can't use this one, so let's try loading up another tree from somewhere. Let's see, desktop. Thought I had another one somewhere around here. Or maybe it's in there. Let's see. Let's try this one. Hopefully it reads correctly. It's really, really small for some reason. So let's scale this up 1, 1, 1, and I should pause this. Let's see, where are we at? Whoa, it's way over there. So let's center the pivot. Let's bring that up. Let's move it over here. still underneath. Let's move it up. Let's move it that way. Let's move it down. Move it this way. Let's keep it here on the grid. And let's zoom in on it. It looks like it's okay. Let's see if I turn on something else. Instead of Cineon, just use regular old sRGB. Okay, this will work, this tree. Okay, cool. Let's save this. And let's drop a mesh operation on the terrain. So let's go to mesh, create a mesh. And we'll use the cool new world node. Add a world node. And the object we're going to distribute on here, or actually, oops. Let's redo this. I need to scatter the tree, not the, but on the terrain. So let's, where's the tree? There we go. So we'll do a mesh operation on the tree. And the distribution, though, oh, it's using repro. Great. This is going to take forever. And pause. I should have checked. Oh, it's supposed to be using instances, not repro. And I don't know if it'll crash it. So let's kill this. Because it's a proxy, and you're not supposed to repro proxies with Redshift. You're supposed to use the mesh instance. But here we are. Okay, there we go. Come on. Don't fail me. Is it crashing? Nope, it's okay. It's just going really slow. Oh, God. Let's delete. It's going to take forever. It's basically trying to build unique geometry for the trees, and the trees aren't that light, and so I think each tree is like 1 million poly, and our whole terrain was 1 million, so I just made 10 million, 11 million polygons, and it's taking forever to process real quick. Unique geometry. And so you don't want to do unique geometry for this type of situation. You want to use instances. Okay, so let's just kill this. Okay, let's start over. So let's unhide that, but this time under where are we at? Go under effects, maybe, I don't remember. Yeah, mesh. We're going to go where it says click create mesh, but we're going to hit this box. And instead of mesh instancer, yeah, see, now it's like an instant. It made it no problem. And so, as you can see, it's making the trees no problem. Okay, cool. Now that we've finally got that out of the way, we're going to want to distribute this on the mesh, the terrain. And so let's actually go back to mesh. And well, they've changed some things around since in 2018, so give me a second. Okay, move that here. There we go. Input mesh. Okay, and then now we just, where it says input mesh, these options used to all be here, but now they, in 2018, I guess they made it like this. So you gotta pick mesh. And so let's drop our terrain into input mesh. And so give that a second to cook. And this is one of the reasons you want to use a light terrain, like 100K, and then just displace it, is because the heavier the terrain mesh is, the slower the cooking process to put the points down on a per polygon basis. So it's something to keep in mind. And let's use the world node. And so as you can see, it's scattered our terrain, our trees in some locations, and they're overlapping for some weird reason, but that's okay. And so we're not going to do the ball clustering. So the way we're doing it is terrestrial ecosystem. And this is like a really cool growth-based system, and it already rotates things and scales them for you. It does all that stuff. And so right now there's some spots floating off the ground, but overall it's laid out pretty good. And so what's cool is you can control it by fall off objects. You can control it with different methods, the strength, yeah, pretty much anything you can think of. And so you can change the age, the maximum amount of elements, multiply the seed, and then the genotype. This is what you want to bring up because it influences the age. Like it simulates the age of a forest growing and stuff like that. The slope it can grow on, the quality of moisture, all that type of stuff. But what we're trying to do here is the model size. And so this is important relative to how it lays out everything. And so our model that we're scattering is where's it at? The scale is 1:1. So our model scale or size, we should put in 1 here and see how that affects the scattering method. And so let's go to MASH. Maximum elements. Let's see where the scatters are. There we go. And so, let's back up. Maybe they're too big. Let's actually increase the distribution. So let's try 100. Maybe I shouldn't have done 100. Might be too much, but we'll see. Give it a second. Okay. It laid some of them out. And so let's try ground mesh. Let's input our mesh here. Oh wait, no, mesh. Let's input that. And this is going to influence the way things are scattered on there. So this might take a second. Okay. And it looks like we don't have any more of those floating objects, the floaters. And so let's try to increase the density of this now. Let's try a bigger age, so let's do 100 years old. Let's just see what it comes up with. And so we're getting clustering, but it's overlapping too much. So let's try to change the model size to 10 and just see what happens. Still too much overlap, so let's try model size of 20. Oh, I gotta update the simulation. My mistake. Let this cook. And cool. So we've got this scatter now. And so that's plenty. Let's just leave it be. I don't want to get too crazy. And so let's hit the IPR, see what happens. See if we blow up Maya. Because I don't know how many trees that is, but it's a lot. And cool. We've got, you know, our terrain. Switch to filmic medium. Let's increase the exposure. And our trees are a little too dark, but you know, whatever. This is an old proxy. I should have used one of the newer ones we've made, but I just haven't proxied them yet. And so, you know, my mistake, guys, but it is what it is. And so let's actually increase the size of our mesh. So if we go to our mesh, or not the terrain mesh, the proxy, let's increase this. Let's double the scale. And let's tweak the slope influence so it doesn't go up the slopes too much. Let's do 0.5, reload. And I probably should have paused it, but whatever. That's too much actually on the slopes. Let's do let's pause it actually. And let's try slope influence of 0.75. Let's reload. I don't want the trees on the hills, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, so the hills remain a little more barren. And you know, this is only one tree. Obviously some variety would help in the trees and stuff like that. And actually, let me open up the hypershade. I just want to check something. Under sRGB, sRGB. Let's fire up the IPR. And let's color correct some things. Let's move this to the side. Let's drop a color correct. Into our base. And what just happened? Oh, wrong color correct. Oh god, that's the Maya default. So let's do a color Or let's just type in correct. There we go. I was using the wrong color correction. The Maya default ones don't work with Redshift. You got to use the Redshift specific one. Okay, there we go. And let's actually increase the contrast and darken the ground. Let's darken it a little more. This is maybe too much contrast. So, okay, cool. So now we've got this giant terrain. And let's increase the contrast on this and drop the levels a tad to compensate. And yeah, there you go. You know, we've got this terrain now with a bunch of proxy tree assets. And obviously, yeah, the leaves and stuff aren't, they're, I think, ACES, and so the color spaces aren't matching. But you guys get the idea. Let's try Filmic. Yeah, so if you scatter different trees, different, you know, rocks, and just layered up stuff, added normals and bump and all that stuff, you could really just start to go wild with the options. And obviously the best case of doing this would be to use real satellite data, a DEM, and then just build it, add procedural effects on top of the DEM data, and that would give you the best results in terms of like real, because you're using real data basically from the real world. Let's bring that down. Cool. We've got our terrain. And so for an aerial view, you know, this isn't bad. So actually let's rotate around. Let's build a cool camera. And let's get some renders going. And so for, let's do 1920 by 1080. And our height will be 800, which is cinema cut. And let's refresh the IPR so we get the new aspect ratio. And yeah, cool. And so if you guys start adding other stuff on here, you know, if we bring in like a volume or something, so let's just try it just for fun. And we bring in, where's the volume? There we go. And where is it? Up. Where do I have that volume? Yeah, dig around. I know I've got an extra one somewhere around here. on my desktop. My fluid copy VDB. Okay, let's copy that one, and I guess I'll give you guys that one just so you guys could use it in your own stuff. And that should have loaded it. Let's put density in there. And where is it? It's probably tiny. Ah, there it is. So we could get some scattering going on in there. Change the density. Maybe not absorb as much. This is probably a terrible VDB file though. But you know, you get the idea. You'll drop in some VDBs and play around with them. And so let's just get rid of that. That was a bad VDB. I need to make a Houdini one. But I'll actually, speaking of that, speaking of clouds and stuff, I'm going to cover that in another tutorial in Houdini, how to just scatter a bunch of clouds and then save that out as a VDB so you could load them up in Maya. I don't have some right now on my desktop to just drop in, so I could lay out the clouds on top of this, but we'll cover that some other time. And yeah, I think this is it for the tutorial, covering the basic terrain generation using the tools and exporting the geometry, exporting the maps that are necessary. I quickly covered scattering some stuff on there and how to layer up the map data that we generated. And hopefully you guys can get real creative and make custom terrains and do some really cool stuff with this. You could go sci-fi with it, or I don't know, whatever you guys come up with. I'm sure you guys will be making some neat stuff. And I'll be using this and making a few more of these that I'll be using for another tutorial, where I'll be combining these terrains. I'll be combining it with the assets that we've made, the trees. I just haven't proxied them yet. And then we'll be making some buildings, and the whole plan is that we're going to eventually lay this all out, lay it all together into a scene that will render, and then eventually we'll even cover projection painting on top. And so we'll hopefully make something pretty cool at the end of everything. And before I wrap this up, I'll probably just maybe add a little more strength to the volume, volumetric air, see what we get. It's 4. And yeah, you guys will hopefully have fun experimenting with all this and making some cool terrains and stuff. Alright guys, till next one. Hey guys, so I ended up working on the lighting and stuff a little bit for this scene, and all I did really, it's the same layout and stuff. The textures are all the same. I just basically just tweaked the lighting, and so I got rid of the physical sun and sky. And personally, it's not that good. The Redshift Physical Sun and Sky is using an old model. Most render engines now use the Hosek model, and it gives better lighting and stuff. And typically, in most circumstances, you shouldn't even be using the physical sun and sky. The pretty much the practice in the industry is you usually use a dome light. So that's what I ended up doing. I have a dome light, and I have a HDR mapped out, and then you just drop one light. So in our case, it's just a directional light, and I have it matching the same direction as the sun in the dome light. And this just gives you nice cast shadows. So if I turn it off, you'll notice that these shadows are going to disappear right now. And so now it's just the dome light by itself. And so you use the directional light, and I have it mapped out to 5200 just because that's a pretty good day temperature. And the intensity's at 2. And so this gives you just a nice cast shadows and a direction of your highlights and stuff. So this is the other light I added, and then I have just one more light, this second physical light. And so if we zoom into that, it's just a tiny little disc that if you make a physical light, it comes in as a square, but I used a disc, and it's the default size. I just wanted it to be small. And so as you see, compared to the tree proxies, it's really small. And I just left it in the corner of the entire landscape. And this light is actually not casting any diffuse or specular contribution or shadows or anything. So I turned all that off. And what I wanted this light for only was to contribute to the atmosphere. So that's how I'm getting this glow and this sense of atmosphere right here. So if I crank this up to like 1, you'll notice that the atmosphere is going to get bigger, the glow, as you can see. And so if I turn it off, we'll have none. And so there's no atmospheric influence anymore. And so I left this at 0.8. And that just gives it a good sense of atmospheric haze. And it's good to do this with lights where you just use one light with no influence on your terrain or anything, and it just influences the atmosphere. Same thing with caustics. You'll use a caustic specific light. And in terms of settings, I actually don't even have GI on. If I turned it on, let's just see what happens. It probably is going to end up looking the same. And the reason, yeah, it basically looks the same. And the reason it looks the same is because the back and the bottom is being lit up by the dome light. So really there's no bounce lighting going on. It's being evenly lit by the dome light, and then the directional light's hitting it from one angle. So in big outdoor scenes like this, you don't really need GI, and that'll help speed up your render times. And the only other thing that's going on here is, well, the volume, obviously, and the photographic exposure, where I set the white point so that it gave me a cool shot like this, and so it's a cooler image. And I just crushed the blacks and allowed for strong overexposed highlighted spots. And so if I were to actually turn this off, for example, and move it all the way to the left, it's going to get warm. See, so now we got a warm render because the light and the HDR are actually really sunny, warm kind of sky. But for this distance, I just prefer to have a little bit of color temperature, white point set to a warm yellow like this. And that just helps cool down the whole image. And obviously, if we want, we could tweak this further, saturate the... let's actually select this first so I keep it saved. We could saturate the fog atmosphere further so it goes really blue or something. Or we could saturate it to be more of a yellow. But since we're compensating for it, we're not going to really notice it too much, since our white point was set to that. But of course we can increase the strength too, so if we were to put this at 0.5 or something, see, it's going to be even hazier now, which isn't, this one's kind of cool with this amount of haze, maybe 0.3. But yeah, you guys get the idea. let's leave a point a level of haze of 0.2 or something. And so yeah, and then the typical settings, if you guys have seen my unified sampling tutorials, that'll cover all this. And yeah, that's about it. You know, we don't even have a fancy LUT or anything on. This is just plain old sRGB. And you know, this is the result we're getting from our shot. And so hopefully you guys, you know, learn something cool. And just to, you know, give us an example, I'll just IPR from the perspective camera, and so you could really see what's going on from other angles. And there's that light that's casting the atmosphere. And so yeah, you guys could tell how it's all working out and stuff. And basically, yeah, I just, you know, just art direct your atmosphere and your haze and all that type of stuff, and you'll be able to control your scenes and get some cool lighting going. And then now you guys could see the HDR actually. And so what's neat is I could probably just change the HDR to some other thing, and you know, we'll see what happens. So if we change it to like the airport HDR, we're getting totally different lighting conditions, but our directional light, see, now we're getting an ambient lighting. And so, you know, what's cool is you could just play around with it, have fun. We'll move it back to our beach HDR. Yeah, as you can see, you know, we've got all our little trees and our terrain and all that cool stuff going on. And so you guys could break apart the scene, tweak it, you know, explore. That's if we turn off the volume atmosphere, turn it back on. Maybe we can tone it down a little so it's not as strong. Yeah, you know, the possibilities are all there for you guys to explore and build your own scenes. Hopefully you guys make some really cool stuff. And using all the techniques, all these techniques apply same way in Houdini or whatever app you're using. Just you got to just build the terrain in a Houdini, how I showed you guys, and export the maps, export the polygons, whatever you guys want, and it'll all work out. And so next tutorial, I'll probably be covering displacements a little more in detail, so that way in the future when we build our own terrains we can get more detail going on in there. And I'll also be covering scattering. So I kind of just quickly went through it for Maya people in this tutorial, but I'm going to want to go a little more in depth into using MASH, and I'll be going a little more in depth into building your own Houdini scattering system. And you know, that way you guys could scatter the assets that we built, all those trees and stuff from the previous tutorial. And so you guys will now have, hopefully by the end of the third tutorial, everybody will have ways to build their own terrains, you know, and you guys will have your little terrains you know how to build. You'll have your library of trees that you could scatter on these terrains, and then after the third tutorial we'll know how to scatter. And so then after that, the plan is we're going to build some buildings, and we're going to lay all this out in some scene assembly, and eventually we're going to, you know, render out a cool shot using trees, our buildings, and our terrain. And we'll use projection mapping, and we'll be adding details the old map painting way, and putting it all together in comp and stuff, and we'll have a finished shot. And so that's the goal for these next couple videos. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys learned some cool stuff. I look forward to seeing whatever you guys come up with. Alright guys, have a good one. Thanks.